we've heard about the rise of Gen AI, as well as some experimentation with agentic AI. And we know there is a need for accountability, standards, and trust. I think our conversation sits somewhere in the middle of all of that, because advertising has long depended on inferred intent, right? What people click, what they watch, what they buy, what they search for, and what they respond to. And that worked when those behaviors reflected people. Now we're in a different environment with bots generating engagement, AI systems shaping what we see, and yes, as they mentioned in that earlier panel, agents will soon be acting on our behalf. And then content and even humans can be synthetic, right? And David will talk about that, I'm sure. I recently watched a movie called The AI Doc, or How I Became an Apocalyptimist. I think that's how you pronounce it. Did anyone see that doc yet? Okay, you saw it. I mean, what stuck with me is the anxiety and optimism in that film. It's like, what are we really doing to people's lives with AI and the choices within the system? So I think our conversation is about like what counts as human intention now, and what can advertisers trust, but also what can humans trust, right? So to ground our conversation, I want each of you to briefly introduce yourselves and kind of talk about the lens you bring to the conversation. I'll prompt you, I'm the AI prompt. Sean, let's start with you. You're a creator, and you are now also creating verification in this space.
Yeah.
What are you working on, and how does it connect to this question about human signals and intent?
So, I'm Sean. Hi, humans. I am a music producer and songwriter, and I have been in the industry for, God, it's crazy, like 10 years, which I'm 32 now, so that's like a third of my life. So, been making music for, I think, a long time. And about 3 years ago, I started a company called Verified, and I saw ChatGPT, and I was like, holy cow, this is gonna change songwriting. Like the impact on, I mean, you can prompt a poem and that's basically lyrics. So I was hanging out with my friend at a very human place called the gym, which I have not been to in many months. But we were at the gym, and we're like, we gotta do something about this. We gotta, protect creators, like creators first. And so we set out to create this nutrition label for content. And we realized that all the platforms are optimized for volume, not scarcity. And, we want to create the human premium, which, everyone talks about this human premium, but there's no infrastructure for it. So that's exactly what we're building. And we're starting with social. That's our tip of the iceberg, social network, built for humans only. And we're building in nutrition labels, so labeling. So everything here is very synchronistic, and I'm really excited to be here.
Okay. Dana, you've spent years thinking about intent and manipulation. How are you looking at intention in this current landscape?
Thanks, Lynn. My name is Dana LaFon. I was formerly with the government. I recently retired, and now I represent myself as a behavioral scientist. My work within the government was focused on looking at the bad guys and looking at their psychology of the bad guys, think profiling, but from a national security perspective. So I've been knee-deep in understanding intent, manipulation, countering manipulation, which was huge for many years. And now I focus on how do we, I say my mission is to assist in countering undue influence globally by building resilience of the population. So that is my mission focus. I'm happy to talk about that ad nauseum if you have any questions about that. But I've been focused on the harsher side of manipulation. And what is that threshold? Because I don't think manipulation is a dirty word. I think successful people manipulate their environments in positive ways. It's not so much that I think manipulation is a tool, and I can go into the conscious and the unconscious tools of manipulation, but it's the intent and what you intend to do with it. And I think there's an obvious that's okay area, default nudges that get you to be an organ donor. A-okay with that, nobody would argue with that, I think. And then there's the obvious, I'm going to deceive you, or I'm going to manipulate you to do something that's not in your best interest. Obviously, I think most people would agree that that's harmful. There's a gray area in the middle that is a moralistic judgment, and who is responsible for deciding if that's immoral or moral. And so that's the gray area that I've been focusing on. I think I took psychology in the federal government. I took psychology into cyber. So I thought, let's do the hardest way possible. So I think so staying in that gray area is very natural to me. That's me. That's what I do now. My focus on countering disinformation, countering the effects, because every part of a disinformation campaign has let me rephrase that. Every part of a successful disinformation campaign has a manipulation piece. You have an author with an intended narrative, you have a targeted audience, you have amplification, and in my experience, ad manipulation technique, those are the 4 criteria that every successful, meaning they've influenced somebody to do something that the author wants, has, and that manipulation technique is the glue that sticks the narrative into your cognition. That's what changes your belief to lead to action. And so if you can counter that manipulation technique, ignoring the other 4, you can't counter the author. It's very nebulous, so oftentimes it's very hard to address. It's hard, you can't really counter or lecture to the targeted audience, and amplification, they're in the audience's attention space. It's very hard to counter that, but you can counter the manipulation technique with behavioral science strategies. So that's my space. And I'm not sure I actually answered your question, but that was my
You did.
Okay.
You definitely explained
you.
what you will bring to this conversation. David, you sit somewhere very interesting. You work in a space where it's your job to think about the data of the consumer journey and experience, but then you also work around the area of consciousness, right, and human consciousness. So how are you thinking about intent in your work right now?
I gotta say, I'm totally fanboying about Cass because I've read Nudge about 10 times, and I love this space of behavioral science and the ethics of it, because it's actually what my entire career has been about, right? And I couldn't have stayed in marketing because if it was all about manipulation and and getting people to buy things that they don't need. I can't do that ethically. I turned down work that was I had, the Purdue family say, hey, let's sell more, drugs. I was like, not going to do it. Right. So, I'll tell a little bit about me first. And then, so I'm at the nexus between, data and strategy. I call it strategic analytics, understanding human intent by what people say, right? People are having conversations all over the internet, and there's all this unstructured data where they're saying what their expectations are, what their experience is across the entire journey. You can actually the key to any good any good relationship, whether you're married, whether it's a friendship, is listening, right? And understanding what someone thinks about and cares about. So at the end of the day, we fundamentally learned how to turn all that unstructured data of conversation into this is this type of person, and these are their expectations, and these are their experiences across the journey, and where those gaps are where you're going to lose them, right? Where they expect something better than what they're getting. Sounds normal, right? And then, but also you bring in the idea of human consciousness, because it is true. The fact is only 5% of our decision making is actually I'm going to do that, and we understand the reason. 95% is unconscious. We don't really understand why. It is the system 1, system 2 thinking. And so, I totally geek out about this stuff, and it has to do with how are we as humans, and how do we learn to make more of those decisions more conscious? And what's the ethics of once you understand a journey, once you understand where the gaps are in the journey, how do you ethically nudge someone in the right direction? if you're, I always say, I find people who have dandruff and sell them dandruff shampoo. I'm not trying to find people who don't have dandruff and sell them dandruff shampoo. So it's like, that's the ethical way of marketing, right? If you find people by listening to them who have a real problem and help them solve that problem in a good way that's beneficial to them, then you're not manipulating them. You're actually helping them understand what's good for them. So that's been my whole career.
All right. So as I've discussed with you guys before, they don't know this. This is a conversation, right? It's not, I'm not going to go, Dana, Sean, that you riff off of one another. You can challenge the other, and then we'll leave some time at the end for the audience to ask questions. So I guess my first question, and let's start with the idea of intent. As I mentioned when I first started, intent in advertising, we've thought of it to be clicks, searches, like you said, people saying things, leaving comments online. And the ways that AI is now reshaping some of this. How much of this is actually explicitly people's intent versus
flop?
Yes. Thanks for saying it. You saw I was stuck. Thanks for saying it. Yeah.
I do think, look, because only 5% of what we do is conscious. I do fundamentally believe in listening to people, right? And we're all listening to each other. I think if you listen at scale, you can understand a lot about humanity, and so that's one thing. Now, of course, like any survey, there's survey bias, there's all these biases. You've got to understand all that, right? And you've got to look at a couple different data sets. Like conversational data is one data set. So asking them survey data is another data set. What they're actually doing is another data set. And finding that nexus and then of course, then trial and error, right, over time, and you get better and better and better. And so, I'll talk about this a little bit. We're actually now bringing all that into what we're calling synthetic persona, where we actually take all that data, turn it into a human-like object, that is AI.
A digital twin.
A digital twin, in a sense, that then, brings all that data in, and you can talk back and forth to this persona, but it embodies all the data underneath it, so it helps understand what the wants, needs, and desires are, and how do you sort of serve the person. If we get back to what we were talking about originally, where our job is to serve people, okay, that's easy on a one-to-one basis, if you care. But on a one-to-many basis, you really need the data underneath it to really start to understand and then test and learn continuously.
I'll add to that. I agree. 5% of our decision making is conscious. That means a lot is under the surface, right? The iceberg that's the part that's under the water is much bigger. So if we think, let's have the human tell us what their intent is, you're only getting 5%. I think the scary and advanced part, maybe not scary, maybe scary, is when we figure out that in my world, there's something called leakage, which is if I were going to do a profile, I would look for behavioral leakage. And that gives me a window into what's under the sea level of that iceberg. That gives me a clue about that 95%, what their true intent is, because that 95% is covered with filters and where you grew up and things you've been exposed to and your belief. Like all of that is one big bucket of soup that's going on. So if somebody tells you they recognize their biases, don't believe them. And if you identify a bias or a manipulation tactic, like hurry up and get them, there's only a few left, you can say, oh, that's scarcity. That doesn't mean you're not going to fall for it. Sucker for a good scarcity campaign.
I would argue that probably places like Reddit, where you're anonymous, almost are like the subconscious of the internet, where people just actually share all these things that are often quite scary, that you can understand what's happening underneath that they're afraid to admit. Now it's not 100%, but It gets you more than hi, I'm so and so. Let me represent myself as this, and it's and people are like, oh, they're just complaining. But but that's important to understand too, and so it gives a little bit more points to the kinds of biases, the kinds of fears, the kinds of deep human things that they're afraid to admit if they're trying to fix a person.
Right. Sean, while we're here, I'm curious how platform and creator economics shape behavior signals today.
they shape us so much. It's our entire dopamine structure, and like our lives are run a lot of times by social media. And where do we go when we wind down at the end of the day? Social media a lot of times. I bet everyone in here is on LinkedIn, and the incentive on LinkedIn and every social media structure is quantity over quality. And so naturally that aligns with Gen AI. And now there's bots posting and bots commenting on those posts, and then bots replying to those comments.
You know what's funny? When the human replies to the bot, and it's like, shut up, bot.
Yeah, it's pretty nuts. So the same thing is happening, with Spotify, and Velvet Sundown was a big example of a band that blew up on Spotify. Come to find out, it's completely fake. So the platforms are optimized, I keep saying this, but they're optimized for volume. And as a creator, you can't create like that. It's not real. Like you create your masterpiece. Like imagine Adele creating 5 albums a year and posting 3 videos a day, which you sign a record deal today and they expect you to post 3 videos a day. Can you believe it? And if you don't, they pull your funding. So social media has not just affected how consumers and creators create. It's affected everything else around it. And what we're doing, our approach is to give agency and intent back to the users by a very simple little thing called a content filter. And at the top of your feed, you can filter out AI. Simple as that. And on the way in, we want to be My Terms compliant. So working with IEEE on that. And so essentially all of your data, you become the server rather than the client server relationship. And yeah, I think social media has a responsibility to do these things, but they're archaic now. I mean, I think 15 years in tech is pretty archaic. So sorry for everyone who's been in tech over 15 years, but yeah, it's pretty crazy that these companies are their incentives are not aligned with humanity. They're not aligned with advertisers. They're not aligned with really anyone but themselves. So we want to build kind of like a reset on that.
To your point about the companies being aligned with themselves and profit, recently, or maybe it was last year, Spotify, one of the top artists, and it's happened more than once, was an AI artist. Like, how is this happening?
Well, people can't tell. That's the thing. There's no nutrition label. Like Selena Gomez got a bunch of flack, and Taylor Swift lost 1 million followers overnight. Like, if you're a business and you're relying on influencer marketing, like that's a major exposure. If with deepfakes, imagine one of your influencers, some stuff comes out that's not even true, but the damage is done. Now your whole brand is exposed, capturing that risk. So, we need these labels. We need infrastructure. And with Verified, social is our beachhead. Like, I'm using beachhead because I just learned that word. Yeah, I'm a rookie CEO. Social is our beachhead. I like the beach. And we want to create the reality infrastructure for the internet, the human premium. And I think we really do need a nutrition label that's like cross-platform, just for the whole internet. And so, yeah, I think I don't know. I'll leave it at that.
So can we still trust observed behavior as a proxy for human intention? Can we? Based on what you've all said so far.
Observing humans, yes. You got to make sure you're observing humans.
But that's the thing.
Right?
How
you can tell the difference. And of course, you're constantly testing and learning, right? So you can tell the difference between bot speak and human speak. Now AI is going to get much better, but right now you can. And you then validate, which we always do with, conversations, surveys, like, with people, like, does this make sense? Do you feel this is really true? Now, of course, again, you got survey bias there, but you do at least get, does this feel valid? And then you have to then experiment in the wild, right? And performance marketing isn't over, right? So it's like we still have to go and go, okay, we put this out, but this is working. Put this out, but this is working. Do people like it? Now, it's got to be back towards positive nudging, positive, I would say, are you adding value? Are you extracting value at the end of the day, right? So if you're adding value to the people who you're servicing, which is what marketing should be, that's a good thing, and you can test it.
So I would say, how would you know?
So I'm not talking about video. I'm talking more like, because yes, video is going to become beyond, So think about, I'll give a use case, right? So right now, we're talking to, I deal in healthcare quite a bit. I deal in consumer too, but healthcare quite a bit. And we're talking to, how do we understand specific HIV doctors for specific medicine that rather than take a daily pill, you take a long-lasting injectable. The case is that people don't want to be reminded they have AIDS every day, so they'd rather take something longer, but they're not having the conversation. So how do we understand what this challenge is, right? So there's people all over talking about it, and it's very specific, and there's doctors talking about it, and it's a very specific thing. And so we're able to really understand what types of doctors there are, what their motivators are, what's happening in the office, and we're pulling a bunch of different data, right? Everything from the EHR data with that from the conversation, because that's being pulled in now, to specific forums where they're having this conversation, and understanding where the gaps are, where the barriers are between what the patients say they want and what the doctors say their challenges are. And then we validate it with the doctors, right? And we go and go, hey, is this a real thing for you? Is this happening? And they'll tell us, right? And we'll say, yeah, actually, this is real. Something I didn't think about, but it is actually a real challenge. Would this be helpful if we did this? And they're like, oh, yeah, actually, that would be. So you're going to have to there's always going to be humans. You can't take the humans out, right? And, I mean, obviously, that's not the point. You've got to become more human. But, again, if the tech also gives the ability to listen to more people if we're open to listening and opening to then just use the data to statistically understand how big is this group and what are their challenges versus how big is that group versus what are their challenges. That's a very good use of tech to add value.
Dana, I'm still stuck on your question. Even after David said all of that, how do we know it's human? What should people in this room be afraid of most with that question?
I don't know if afraid. I think that to my earlier point about building resilience, I think the point is, how do we build resilience to the manipulation tactics, regardless of whether it's a human or a bot, right? So we're going to get to the point where we're not going to be able to distinguish the difference. In some cases, we're already there. Embrace it, it's happening, it's going to happen. But how do we make the majority of people, or at least a statistically significant number of the populace, more resilient to manipulation techniques? And then there's a herd community. There's a lot of research on how many do we have to increase their susceptibility or decrease their susceptibility, so that now as a herd immunity, the majority of the population. I mean, imagine that. If you had a statistically significant number of people who are more critically thinking by different behavioral science techniques, not just debunking, but pre-bunking, influence inoculation, those kinds of strategies. What's that number that we'd have to increase the population to be more critical thinkers? Because that, when you do that, it doesn't just stick to what you've immunized them against, in that I can inoculate you against scarcity, but that you're not only going to be inoculated against that particular manipulation tactic, you're going to generalize that to other techniques and bring on sophisticated AI, and it has its place. It has its goodness. I'm not an expert on where that is, but I believe there is people in the room that have that understanding. So how do we embrace the fact that we're not going to be able to tell the difference in the near-term future or even now, but how do we just become more resilient population?
I would say that it's not super hard to tell the difference. Not yet, but with biometrics, it's actually, everyone in this room, I'm sure, hates the word friction And I was actually talking with our PM, project manager Johan back there, and he's like, do not mention the word friction.
I was going to ask you about friction. I'm glad I'm not.
He's like, please do not say friction. And I'm like, friction. Anyone in the self-improvement space, like coaching space, they're actually coming around to friction maxing. So what's funny is humans actually like a little bit of friction. And with Verified, what we can do, and what I will bet will take off, cross-platform, is a little thing called a biometric gate. And, for any meaningful interaction, I know likes and, scrolling, that's very meaningful. You can't really gate that. But as far as like a comment or a message or a post itself, you can biometrically gate that and say this actually came from a real person. And if you, with content provenance and origin, I'm a music producer. As soon as Suno came out, I went and met with them. I'm like giving them all these ideas. And then I started using it like crazy. And started putting samples in my songs, and I was like, mixing AI with human music. It's a very real thing to have, half AI, half real, whatever. So at the end of the day, it's the people behind the content. It's not so much that we do want to know if something is AI generated or not fully. There is a lot of gray space. That's all technically possible. There's great detectors, there's great systems. It's also something that we're building called the creator's note, where it's a creator attestation, like you show how you made the thing. But beyond that, I believe that the people that content originates from is the most important thing. And if you can say, even if you wrote it with AI, if you're posting it, for that to be linked to a real person, even if it's an anonymous person, we're not, doxing anyone. We're not sharing Andrew's address with anyone on Verified. I think knowing that came from a real person is awesome. And I think that also applies to advertising,
Speaking of that it also applies to advertising. David, do you think we should be labeling analytics and attribution when it's agent-driven?
Label. So I go back to, I'm sorry, your name, whether your panel earlier, you're talking about people are okay with the analytics sort of that drive the sort of you're figuring out, what's going on. They don't want the AI slop on the other side that looks really general. I have that same feeling that
they were okay with the where.
Yes, that's what I mean. Yeah. The what, exactly.
They didn't want the what to be entirely AI generated,
Yeah.
but it's harder to tell the difference. They don't like that conceptually.
Yeah.
They want the human to be fine.
That's exactly, I feel that in my role is that just understanding, again, it goes back to I'm not talking about marketing all day because I do think about a lot of things, other things, but it goes back to understanding, are you adding value or extracting value? Again, if I go find the people who have dandruff and say, hey, this is a good dandruff shampoo, and I use the analytics to do that, I'm adding value to that person. And it's like, oh, great, thanks. I didn't know about that. Maybe I'll think about it, right? That's a positive thing. And it's not just some AI slop you're throwing at them, but it's something that's adding value to their lives. So it goes back to, I know we use one word marketing for everything, but the truth is, if we bring back the humans and we really think about, and this is something I think about a lot in this profession, is about adding value to people. And the AIDS example, right? It's people who don't want to be reminded every day they have AIDS, but they don't know there's a long-lasting injectable that means they don't have to think about it for 2 months. That's adding value to that person's life. And so if I use data to understand how to get to that person or understand them and understand their predicament, that's not a problem. And then, of course, I'm not going to throw some AI at them about, you're at the doctor and this happens. You got to make it a real thing so that they feel and they care and it feels real to them, right? So there's a balance. How do we use these things as tools? That goes back to, agentic conversation. It's how do we use the tool to support humans versus making decisions for us and throwing stuff at us and trying to manipulate us, right? And that's the thing. And one more thing I want to add, it's a little bit of a pivot, but as we're thinking about, how do we inoculate ourselves, the other thing to think about is human consciousness, right? It's the idea that most of our decision making is unconscious. I think a lot about, I lead a school for mindfulness and meditation, and sort of the adding more friction, adding more thought to like who we are and being more present is the way in which we don't just, go with system one. It's like we're actually kind of going, I'm here, I'm experiencing this thing. How do I feel about it? It feels icky, it feels not real, or it feels helpful. Let me think about it. We as humans are going to have to get a lot better at that. I think the more we do that and become more conscious as human beings, the less susceptible we'll be to a lot of these things.
I get that, but then how do we get the systems to be more helpful, right? To focus more on the personalization and less on the manipulation?
Honestly, I think some will and some won't, and I think people over time will, I hope, this is my hope for humanity, is that we will choose the things that are more helpful to us and begin to reject the things that are unhelpful. I think when we start to see, like even now, like what you're saying about the backlash against fake influencers versus real people, that's a good example, right? It's like, it's like someone who has a real connection with a real human, and all of a sudden it turns into bots they're trying to scale, and people are like, this sucks, and they leave. But that's real, right? So I think, I honestly think there's going to be a big backlash to all the AIification of the world, where people are going to crave more real experiences. We've seen this, many times in this cycle of, things right after COVID, right? Everyone wanted to get together again. It's like, so these things happen. So I honestly think that the more we can provide meaning in everything we do, people are going to crave that as, the volume of things turns more to AI slop. I think people are going to turn away from that.
Okay. The labeling sounds like a great thing, but bad actors always get around everything. Will labeling be enough then? What do you guys think about that?
I think labeling is just a piece to the puzzle. I've been at this point for 3 years, and I've done, oh my gosh, it's a journey, and tech is constantly evolving. And luckily, I have a great team. Our guy Sean Morris back there is a genius, and so we're literally just researching stuff every day. And what's really cool is that we're built for interoperability. So we didn't want to get into detection as like an arms race, because it is an arms race. And, some companies might be compliant with watermarks, some companies might not. New open source models might have like no artifacts, things like that. Like it's getting, like you said, it's getting really hard to tell every day. And so luckily, we've partnered with some really cool people who are like at the helm and constantly ahead of every new release of generative AI image, video, audio models. But I think that's just one piece of the puzzle, which is biometrics. And, I'm sure many people in this room have heard of World, which is our beloved Sam Altman's company. And they are built by Tools for Humanity, which created something called an orb, which scans your iris and then creates a token out of that. But there's a massive black market for those tokens. So what I think is, homomorphic tokenization is a little bit cooler. There's the potential, which we're going to integrate this, which is you capture a biometric on your device and it never leaves your device. So no one ever has access to that, but it's one-to-many, which basically means you can compare it to everyone else, privacy preserving. So no names, no like identifiers associated with that. And ongoing, that essentially proves that you're the same person every single time, which nobody has unlocked. You go to LinkedIn, like I could sell the password to my LinkedIn. I could hook up an agent to my LinkedIn. Is that me? You know? So there is a massive black market for credentials, things like that. And we really need to, you know, emphasize biometrics in a way that's not like, you know, oh my gosh, you know, digital ID. It's not a dangerous space if done right. And a lot of companies have not done it right. And I'll say this and I'll shut up because I know I take a lot of space.
It's great though.
So a lot of companies use these KYC providers. This is news to me. And yeah.
Tinder right now.
Oh my gosh, yeah. So KYC magically doesn't have any responsibility for data hacks, and either does the social media company utilizing them. So when your data is stolen or accessed, there's nobody who takes responsibility. So we're not going to use KYC, and we're going to put, you know, that data back on the user. User manages it, and yeah, I think the way these things are done, all the tech exists. It's just how you put it together.
I just piggyback off that because, like, yeah, look, there's bad actors. There's going to be bad actors. We're going to have to get smarter. Like, already, like, Tinder is actually using these KYC things to verify I'm a real person, but you're able to put in like 7 images that are not you, and the last image is like an AI-generated image that looks a little like you, and it's like, fine, that's you. And then people and the scammers are completely romance scamming people, right? So we're gonna have to start to understand that a lot of this stuff's not real, and how do we, you know, I love what you're doing. How do we actually start to really think about like what is real and define it? You're right.
And with regard to safeguards, whether it's labeling or biometrics, all of that, from my previous life, there will always be criminal intent and there will always be adversarial intent. And those are two distinct, but negative intent is abound. There will always be ways around it. And so I was talking to Andrew earlier, and I was listening to the panel earlier, and I thought, you know, who's responsible for countering the criminal and the adversarial, you know, actions that are negative intent? And then that's the worst case scenario, right? Is they're going to get around it. They're not going to label. They're going to sidestep all of the things that help us understand what's authentic and what's authentically human and what's not. I don't think government has a place to tell us a lot about how to manage this, but it will be interesting. And I throw this hypothesis out to this incredibly smart room. This is just a thought bubble, is our government, not just our government, the world's governments have to figure out countering criminal and adversarial intent. And one example of adversarial intent, Russia's generated about 30,000 AI anti-Western articles that are training LLM models. So it's like training the models with that negative intent. So how do we counter? How do governments counter that? And then government and industry working together to say, here's what we've come up with. How do we then apply that in a commercial setting so that we negate the criminal intent at the get-go by the way that the sophisticated tech folks across our governments are figuring that out? I don't know how that would happen or where it would happen, but I think that's a vector that could be leveraged in our world and in our political or governance.
Right. And without getting into politics, is there any belief that we should have some kind of standardization around all of this that comes from a governmental perspective without us getting into politics?
So that's the hard part. When I was a fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations up in Upper East Side, and I had the opportunity to participate with a State Department, this was about 3 years ago, with a State Department effort to identify those standards. And to their credit, they brought in human rights organizations and NGOs, and they brought in different perspectives to listen, to your point, what do we have to be concerned with these standards? That went by the wayside, so I think it's difficult to depend on the government to define industry standards because it's at the whim of how can you not get political? I don't know, but it's at the whim of the administration,
Uh-huh.
right?
Everything is political,
Right.
I know.
So how do we retrofit what we find out works in a sophisticated way into industry?
Well, I mean, someone brought up Cambridge Analytica earlier. Look, we know for a fact